It's important to note that some individuals with narcissistic traits actually do experience cognitive dissonance, or what I'm calling inner conflict, and therefore possess a capacity, albeit limited, for regret and remorse. I mention this because you may be wondering if they can ever change. Can someone who has cheated change their behavior and remain faithful? When there is inner conflict, when the person who was unfaithful feels guilt, regret, and shame over the pain that they've caused, or an image of themselves that they did not live up to, they disappointed themselves. This suggests that with appropriate interventions, Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Infidelity is a topic that resonates deeply with many, touching on universal themes of trust, betrayal, and resentment, just to name a few. While the focus of this episode will mainly be on issues surrounding intimate relationships, the material will resonate with anyone affected by betrayal. This discussion is for those who have felt the sting of unfaithfulness. Maybe you're having a hard time with a parent's infidelity that led to a separation. Or perhaps you or someone you know is holding on to anger because you can't overcome an injustice. In other words, this is not just about the act of infidelity itself, but about the broader emotional and psychological impact it has on you and your relationships. The goal of the next two episodes is to understand its complexities and explore paths to healing and repair. Let's start with a common question I often hear. Why do people cheat? The reasons for infidelity are varied and complex. Common motivations include dissatisfaction in their primary relationship, feelings of neglect, the thrill of a new experience, or a lack of emotional fulfillment. Narcissists may cheat because they crave admiration and validation, often seeking it outside of their primary relationship. They might also rationalize their actions, or even believe that their partner is at fault for any dissatisfaction they feel. For instance, he stated that he felt emotionally neglected as his partner became increasingly absorbed in, you could fill in the blank here, her work, the life of their child. But in short, this is what led him, he states, to seek connection and validation elsewhere. So, what I'm suggesting is not all cheaters experience regret. In other words, if you see the problem as emanating from somebody paying particular attention to something else or somebody else, that's not the antidote, right? That's not what's going to lead to genuine regret. Why? Because it's not your fault. But what about cheaters who experience regret and remorse? In my experience, when thinking about the future of your relationship with someone who's been unfaithful, while the impact of infidelity, lying, and manipulating on relationships can be quite profound, not all relationships end due to infidelity and cheating. Cognitive dissonance, or in my field, the field of psychoanalysis, this is what we call the inner conflict. It occurs when a person's actions conflict with their beliefs or values, causing psychological discomfort. For cheaters, this discomfort might lead to regret if their infidelity clashes with their self-image, for instance, as a faithful partner. However, for those struggling with narcissistic characteristics, the need for admiration and attention often outweighs their inner conflict. They may then seek immediate gratification to alleviate feelings of emptiness or worthlessness when the admiration begins to slow down. Again, take that example I gave just a moment ago. his wife's attention turns to the kids. This behavior, coupled with a lack of empathy, makes cheating easier for them, as their desire for self gratification overshadows the potential consequences of their actions. So, if self gratification overshadows the potential for consequences, we have to think about treatment. Like, how would we treat something like this? Because what I'm suggesting is the cognitive dissonance or the inner conflict is not powerful enough. And in my field, the field again of psychoanalysis, this is what we call when something is egosyntonic. In other words, it's just acceptable. There's not conflict about it. So I'm just thinking ahead in terms of how we would work with somebody like this, which, by the way, is very common with personality disorders. Oftentimes, the behaviors in which they engage are egosyntonic. Think about the narcissist in the grandiose sense of self. That's egosyntonic. In other words, of course I'm the smartest, the brightest, the most attractive, right? So the goal is to make it ego dystonic. We want to increase conflict because without conflict, there's no growth. So in other words, you need some conflict in life to push things along. It sort of serves as an impetus for change. It's important to note that some individuals with narcissistic traits actually do experience cognitive dissonance, or what I'm calling inner conflict, and therefore possess a capacity, albeit limited, for regret and remorse. I mention this because you may be wondering if they can ever change. Can someone who has cheated change their behavior and remain faithful? When there is inner conflict, when the person who was unfaithful feels guilt, regret, and shame over the pain that they've caused, or an image of themselves that they did not live up to, they disappointed themselves. This suggests that with appropriate interventions, there is potential for emotional growth and relationship repair. Just a quick reminder, and I know I said this a moment ago, but in this case, we could see conflict is good because without this conflict, there's no push to change. And just again, as another side note, if someone enters into treatment with very little conflict, that doesn't mean necessarily that change is not possible, but the initial phase of any good treatment would work on helping them become more conflicted. So, I think this leads to another question that you may now be asking. What steps do you think a person who cheated needs to take in order to truly change their behavior? In my work with these individuals, treatment focuses on helping them develop a more robust system to experience empathy and understand the thoughts and feelings of their partner, which is a central part of the healing process. But this is not enough. I mean, this is a big task. If you know somebody or you can imagine somebody with narcissistic characteristics, you know they have a limited capacity for empathy. So this is a big part of the work. However, simultaneously, this initial work, this is the initial phase of the treatment, the initial work must also address their need for immediate gratification, validation, and attention, which can be likened to the behavioral patterns of an addiction. Both an addiction and this compulsive need for the grandiose sense of self, which is central. This is a central characteristic, sort of the core of the narcissistic being. But this compulsive need for the grandiose sense of self, for the admiration and attention, impact relationships and create a great deal of emotional turmoil. Much like a person struggling with substance abuse, those with narcissistic traits may compulsively and or impulsively seek out these, I quote, highs to temporarily fill a void, requiring ongoing support and strategies to manage these impulses and develop healthier coping mechanisms, such as what? Such as delaying gratification, something I spoke about in a prior episode. This is also what we call impulse control. It's important to note that addiction and infidelity are not identical. And understanding what drives the infidelity is not to excuse the behavior or minimize how hurtful it can be, but understanding the underlying dynamics at work can potentially help you foster a deeper comprehension of the complexities at play. More importantly, it can aid in your own healing journey. So, what happens once the truth about infidelity comes to light? Many couples can rebuild trust and create stronger bonds through open communication and therapy. However, the cheating becomes a more serious problem when the person who has cheated minimizes the impact it has on you, or if the betrayed partner struggles to move past the betrayal, which also leads to more serious problems. See, I'm saying that both of these are true. It's the person who cheated can struggle with the things that I've mentioned already, with the empathy, right, for instance, and minimize this or blame, but also the person who was betrayed can also struggle. What distinguishes or what leads to these different paths or outcomes? In part, I mentioned, is there regret and remorse? This is a big piece of it. Is there a serious recognition of how your behavior hurt your loved one? Another distinguishing factor has to do with what we may call the adhesiveness of the trauma. Some couples can get stuck when the trauma of infidelity overwhelms the present moment and the past betrayal, with all its intensity, continuously comes to dominate the current relationship. Why do some people get stuck in this trauma? This complex question involves an inability to forgive and a need to hold on to resentment. For the betrayed partner, forgiveness is a personal process requiring the release of resentment and a move toward healing the trauma. It involves acknowledging loss, recognizing the damage, and accepting that things will never be the same. The inability to forgive can perpetuate feelings of resentment and keep individuals emotionally attached to the betrayal, hindering their ability to move forward in life. When one cannot let go of past resentments, the relationship and your life will stagnate. You see, this is what I'm trying to drive home. It's not just the relationship, but your life also will be on hold as long as you hold on to resentment. What I'm suggesting is even if you decide to not continue the relationship, but you continue to hold on to the resentment and anger, this reliving of the pain will prevent emotional healing and growth. If we don't deal with and address the resentment, there will be ongoing accusations, blame, and conflict. In our next episode, we'll take a deeper dive into the topic of resentment. But for now, we have to start wrapping things up. Before I say, until next time, let's quickly review where we are now and where we're going. Infidelity, I hope I'm giving you this impression, is a very complex issue that profoundly impacts individuals and relationships, often invoking intense emotions like betrayal, anger, and resentment. Understanding why people cheat, whether due to dissatisfaction, neglect, or narcissistic characteristics, is crucial for addressing infidelity. Regret and remorse play significant roles in the potential for relationship repair, especially when in a conflict, or what we call cognitive dissonance, prompt self-reflection and change. Empathy development is essential in the healing process. especially if cheaters don't already fully understand the impact of their actions on their partners. Finally, resentment can be a significant barrier to moving forward. Addressing it is critical for emotional healing and growth. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will do a deeper dive into the topic of resentment, exploring why it persists and how to release it to foster better emotional health and relationship recovery, if you so choose to do so, if that makes sense. Okay, as always, if I said anything that confused you, please feel to reach out to me directly. Until next time, engage your mind and your capacity for forgiveness, not your resentment. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.